Okay, I think we're recording. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us for tonight's Salesforce.net meetup. And so let's see, make sure I don't click on something wrong here. All right, so yeah, tonight Kevin's going to give us a talk on a case study using .NET, Dynamics365, and PowerApps. So this should be a good one. And I've heard some of the details already on this, so yes, this should be, you'll have a lot of takeaways from this. But the main thing I want to mention is that next month is we're going to go back to in-person events. So we're not planning on doing online. And this is going to be held at it's now called Wildwood Workspaces, which is also the home of ArchitectNow. So yeah, we're basically going to have a social event there, just a panel. And like I said, it's just going to be an in-person event. I know Alex is going to be helping find some sponsors, whatnot for this. And also go ahead and mention that I will be stepping down from coordinating sponsors and speakers for the Salesforce.net meetup, and Alex will be taking over. So I'll kind of assist Alex on a few things, but I think he's, I think he has this one down. So more on that will come at the next meetup. The other big thing for the next meetup is that we are moving it up a week. So it is Monday, July 19th. It's not the last Monday of the month. So be aware of that. I'll officially click on the announce button probably sometime this week as we gather more sponsors for this event. So with that, Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, perfect. Thank you all. And I guess one other quick point on next month's social, we're still kind of working out the details, and I don't want to speak for Alex, but we will try to do some level of, we'll stream on Teams whatever we can for the event as well. So if you're unable to attend in person, there will be some aspect of it that will be streamed on Teams. Next month will be a social with a panel. So as much as you want to listen in and contribute remotely, if that's the route you choose to take. And then in future events, wherever they'll be held in person or otherwise, I think we'll always try to, since the world has changed a bit, have some remote capacity of doing it via Teams as well. It'll be a little bit different with some people there and some people not. So.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. I shared my contact info. I'm just going to dive in and try to get through a lot of stuff. This is, if you do have questions, please pop them into the chat window. I am logged in here twice, so I can kind of see that. I will do my best. Can't guarantee I will get through all the questions tonight, but if worst, I'll take some offline and make sure that they're addressed. I don't want to leave anything unanswered, but I do want to keep things flowing. I will, like I said, I will share this PowerPoint. There's a little bit about our company in here. I know you've been sitting here for a while waiting, so I don't want to belabor that. If you're more interested in what ArchitectNow does as a sponsor, we do have that information here. Probably quickly enough, I could sum it up and say we do the kind of things we're talking about here. We build things. We're a software development firm here in St. Louis. We're an agile development shop. A whole bunch. We're not a staffing firm. We're a whole bunch of agile teams, developers, product owners, team leads, scrum masters, and companies outsource. They might have projects they don't have the capacity to do, or just need an extra team in addition to their own teams, or maybe they don't have any technical capabilities, and they leverage us for that. And the types of things that we focus on in terms of technology tends to be the technologies we're talking about tonight. As we get into this particular talk, and I've been fortunate enough to be a speaker at the .NET Meetup and assist in any way I can over the years and dev up and try to be as involved as I can be in the St. Louis development community, and even traveling around. I know in-person conferences are coming back, knock on wood. I'm excited to be going out and hanging out with my speaker friends and start to talk again. But as the opportunity presents itself, like it does tonight, for us to give a presentation like this, we always sit back and think, what is cool? What should we talk about? What would people be interested in hearing about? At a company like ArchitectNow, we're lucky to have our hands in a lot of different technology cookie jars, where we've got really cool cutting edge projects going on in Azure and different technology stacks and different architectures, and there's lots of things we could talk about. The particular talk tonight was something that was near and dear to my heart because I focused more on it than most of my team. And I just see a lot of value in showing how these particular technologies fit together. And I also think that, and I could say this just speaking for my own team, even within the group at ArchitectNow, the 20 or so developers that we have, many of my developers don't yet grasp the power that the platforms that you're going to hear tonight hear about tonight, see tonight, how they can work in bigger architecture. We're still evangelizing some of these stacks even inside of our own company. So hopefully, as I go through this and share some of this information, it'll open your eyes to maybe what's possible, and at least the next time you're in a situation where you're trying to come up with, what's the best architecture, what's the best technology choices moving forward for this particular project, for this particular customer, for something new. My goal at the end of the night, if there's one takeaway that I really hope that you get out of this, is just exposure to what's possible that you might not have considered in the past. This is a case study. I'm going to show code. We're going to talk a little bit about what we built and why we built it, because context matters. We don't write code just for the purpose of writing code, right? We were trying to solve a business problem. That business problem, we knew what the requirements were. We knew what the constraints were. One of the biggest constraints you're going to hear about in a little bit is time. We had a very short window of time to solve a business problem. So we were not able to just break out, Visual Studio Code or whatever your IDE of choice is, and SQL Server and custom write a solution from scratch. We needed to be more creative and find, piece together things that solved the problem, and that's what you're going to hear about. This is the agenda. I'm going to describe what we were challenged with doing. And like I said, there's not going to be a ton of PowerPoint here. It's going to be more show than tell. Why we made the decisions we made, and the technologies to solve those problems. Show it all. I'll walk you through some code. I'll show you all the things that we did. We are time constrained, so I've got an hour and a half, couple of hours maybe. Some of it's going to be probably higher level. This is not intended to be a full training class on any one of these particular technologies, but as I said, if there's something you want me to show a little more of, pop it into the chat window. If you feel that you'd really like to dive into one of these particularly, hit me up offline, send me an email, hit me up on Twitter, however you want to reach out, on Teams in this channel if you'd like. And I'd be more than happy to point you at more resources or answer any questions I can. We'll come back later to cost, because that does kind of come up in this. These technologies fit together differently than a fully custom written solution. So you're not just paying hours or a fixed cost to build it up front. There are ongoing costs. Have some pictures of the events that I'm talking about. Hopefully leave time for questions, and we'll be done. So that is the very quick agenda that we're going to try to keep to tonight. And as I said, it's going to be a lot of show in terms of demos and not PowerPoint. This is a lot of text, but I'm going to summarize it for you. If you are unaware, for about the last year and a half, the world has been in a pandemic. It's been a crazy time, obviously. Near the beginning of last year, vaccines started to pop up, right? So the events that I'm talking about now, we're in late June here. These events that were hosted, so the demos I'm showing you today were software I wrote for events that happened in mid-March and mid-April, just to lay the groundwork of the timing. Some friends of mine are doctors, and they work for lots of different organizations here in town, from Centene to SSM Health to all kinds of big, and we're talking St. Louis. If you're from out of the region, just to level set, I'm in St. Louis region. So what these organizations did is that by March, vaccination events and vaccines were starting to become available. People were starting to, and it was very difficult to get them, at least here in Missouri. They were distributed in somewhat of a hodgepodge fashion. You probably know this if you're from around here. People were driving all over the state. They're driving 2 or 3 hours to rural places where they were able to get a vaccine appointment. It was also at that point in time limited. They were really targeting people that had underlying medical conditions and a specific age band. So it wasn't, anybody couldn't just go get one of these unless there was extra capacity. So the organizations that reached out to me at ArchitectNow, they were pooling vaccines that they were getting. So 6 or so healthcare organizations said, we want to take some, instead of us running our own events, we're going to partner together, and we want to pool some amount of these vaccines. We want to make sure that they get into the hands of underserved communities in St. Louis, predominantly in the North St. Louis County and City area is where they were targeting. So it was a very zip code, very age band, very health. They were going after people that did not have phones, that were living below the poverty line. They literally went and signed people up at community centers. They went to people's houses and registered them. They went to libraries. The people that they were trying to get were not your somebody that was sitting at a computer all day that had the means to drive across the state and get an open vaccination slot at the time. So to do this, the 6 or so healthcare organizations reached out to ArchitectNow and said, we need the means of tracking all this. So that's really what I was tasked with. We could have said no. There was a huge constraint. They had the pipe dream that they wanted to host their first event, and they were giving away Pfizer vaccines, and they had 1,500 Pfizer vaccines set aside, and they wanted to host it about 3.5 weeks from the moment they spoke to me. So we had a very short time frame in the software development space. They said, we need a registration site up very quickly. We need to let people start signing up for either a Saturday or a Sunday. They had to pick a time slot when they were going to be there. They had all these organizations had all the doses. They had the doctors, the nurses, the volunteers, med students from WashU. They had hundreds of people willing to volunteer. Each of these organizations had their own software that could do this. But since they were partnering together, there was security and legal risks of allowing doctors from one organization to log into the proprietary, the healthcare management system of another organization, of a competitor, because they technically are competitors, or some of them are. So they decided to write something or reach out to us and have something neutral built that they could use and then essentially throw away. So that's what we're talking about today. We ultimately had a number of events. They were Saturday and Sunday events. You showed up, you registered online, a patient did. They picked a 15-minute time slot when they were to arrive. When they got to one of these events, they registered at a front desk, which is confirmed that you were supposed to be there. You went back and you were administered your first or second dose, depending on which time you came. That data was logged. Ultimately, the outcome of this was we could not just provide these doses. We had to report this data up to the state of Missouri. The state of Missouri maintains a vaccination database called Show Me Vax. It's been around for 20 years. If you live in Missouri, if you grew up in Missouri and you've ever had measles or mumps or any other vaccine of any type, you have a record in this database. Any vaccination provided in the state is required to be logged in this database, just so they know. The same database is being used for COVID vaccine logging. If you go to CVS or Walgreens or anywhere, they have to do the same thing. So we were required to do that. That's why they needed the pieces that we brought to the table. So our task, we had to design, implement a system that we managed the patient sign up. They wanted a website that was mobile friendly that they can use for people to register in advance, so that we had pre-registration complete. As I said, when you're on site, they wanted a registration desk where people could come. Somebody was there with an iPad or other type of device. They registered you. They said, Kevin is here. He's here for his 10 to 10:15 slot. Great. You did have to fill out paperwork and sign some waivers on site. So there was some offline, pen and paperwork done. That didn't affect our system much. That was just kept and archived and used as a backup. And then, as I said, when you actually got vaccinated, you went into a table and a doctor or a nurse or other medical professional would administer the dose of the vaccine. They had a scribe, what's called a scribe, assigned to them that actually sat there with another iPad and recorded who got the vaccine in which arm, which lot number, when it was given, at what date and time, and then that data ultimately went into, it flowed out of the system at the end of the events up to the state. So biggest constraint, obviously, we had 3.5 weeks. And even that's probably being too generous. We needed a website for people to pre-register. People weren't going to register that day. They had a lot of news organizations, News Channel 5, Fox 2 in town were marketing this. We were meeting every week. So they needed some aspect of it up very quickly. So what you're going to see tonight, this is the end of the challenge step of this. What you're going to see and what I'm going to demo is what we built. And the reason I'm talking about it here isn't so much to say, hey, we built this COVID vaccine. Ultimately, we ran 4 days of events and we never used this system again. There's a lot of reasons for it, but the National Guard at the time had taken over the Edward Jones Dome and was providing, they had the capacity to do 5,000 doses a day, and they oversaturated the market and they couldn't get anyone to go down there. So we quit doing events. So we use this, and I'm showing you the technology, but it's could be potentially used again in the future. But at this point, we have no events on the schedule. It's just more of an FYI. So, and I guess I'll come back to one quick thing I said earlier. I had the opportunity of saying no when they asked. Obviously, the way we work and in the seat that I sit in at the company that I work for, there was a part of us that said, we really can't help you. We didn't know what we could do in that time frame. We weren't sure what was possible. We sat down, my team internally, and said, rather than saying no, we want to do what we can to help. What could we possibly pull together in that time frame that provide, that suits their needs, that's reliable? I mean, and it wasn't just a hodgepodge. There's going to be some corners we have to cut. There's going to be choices of technology we wouldn't make otherwise, or maybe we should, but we might not think to. And this is what we came up with, and this is what tonight's talk is going to be about. Instead of using SQL Server or Cosmos or Mongo, all of our data, our core source, single source of truth is Microsoft DataVerse. If you're new to DataVerse, hopefully you won't be at the end of this session. It's going to be a big part of tonight's talk. But DataVerse is the backing entity data store behind what Microsoft Dynamics uses. So we actually, Dynamics is listed here a couple points down, but all of our data, and our data was pretty straightforward. I mean, we could really sit at a whiteboard pretty quickly. We needed people, name, address, phone number, email. We had to communicate with them and send them reminders. We needed addresses. We needed some basic demographics about them. We needed race and ethnicity. This was just some things that the state of Missouri wanted us to send, because at the time they were aggregating and reporting data on the news, and then it went up to the federal government. So there were some standards they were looking to adhere to. But it wasn't a lot of HIPAA secure data, other than just basic name and address and some basic demographics that were even optional. We weren't asking much. Then there was event registration. We needed to know when this person was going to be there over the course of 2 events. If you were there in mid-March and got your first dose, you were required to come back at a different time, a different weekend in April to get your second dose, because that's how the Pfizer vaccine works. So it was pretty straightforward. Entities, we had contacts and we had event registrations. We also had vaccination events, the events themselves, the days they occurred, some administrative data, and the time slots that were available. So if you were to set this up in SQL Server, you're looking at 4 tables. We did it using DataVerse, but it was still 4 primary entities that we were working with. The registration site, the front end data, or the front end website that people went to, we registered a domain name. They came up with the name United Immunity STL, was kind of they set up a nonprofit across all these different companies, and that's what it came across as. We built that, my team, and again, my team's the go-to technology for many people that work at ArchitectNow would be the .NET stack, C# for your APIs, entity framework, lots of the different common NuGet packages that many people on this call might be familiar with, and then Angular. We do a lot of React, but Angular primarily. We jump back and forth. We've got a project coming up with Vue, but TypeScript on the front end, so JavaScript/TypeScript in Angular. We were able to put that together, and I'm going to jump in very briefly over here. This is our website. I'm on a test environment, unitedimmunitystl.com. These are the organizations I'm talking about. So Affinia Healthcare, SSM Health, Home State Health is Centene. That is Centene's Missouri healthcare provider, but Centene owns them solely. Every different state that Centene participates in, they have a different named provider. And in Missouri, it's Home State Health. The Urban League partnered with us, lots of different organizations, but this is a website. This is all the Angular, that first bullet. Very simple site, static, some downloadable information. They did not want big and fancy. We were getting out the door quick. Primarily, the big piece of functionality is you come here and register. You enter that demographic information I talked about earlier. We need a date of birth. And there's a few health screening questions, but we don't store these. If you say, have you had an allergic reaction to a vaccine before? If you say yes, we give you a message back that says, unfortunately, we're not able to accommodate you at these events. So answering incorrectly to these, if you've ever had a severe allergic reaction to any other vaccine, if you say yes, you're unable to do it. Down here, you pick the event. We had multiple at one point. I set one up tonight just for this event. You pick when you want to be there. As these filled up, they disappeared from here. So it's pretty straightforward business logic. We knew that we had capacity for 20 people every 15-minute blocks. We had enough tables, and we have enough doctors and volunteers, and our volunteer schedule said that between 9 and 9:15 on this particular date, we could only handle 20 people. That spread the load out across 2 days. So if 20 people already registered, that went away. You book a vaccination, you get an email response and a text, or you get an error message if something doesn't pass. If you weren't in the right zip code and if you were too young, those are also business rules. We were limiting our target market to certain people, but this was all .NET C# API. So we picked DataVerse, even though I say we wrote this all in Angular, .NET Core, and C#, DataVerse is the database. And I'll show some of that code here in just a little bit. I'll make sure I dive into code and you see all this. I'll show DataVerse, I'll show C# as well. But ultimately, instead of us writing to SQL Server, that we're using a REST API, we're using GraphQL, a number of different things, and we're writing to DataVerse. So we have these entities, and we're, when we read and write them, they're C#, strongly typed classes, but we're posting them and saving them, and we're querying them, and they're coming out of a URL endpoint that is a REST API that is DataVerse. So there's no SQL Server, there's no any other database involved here. Backend administration. So somebody, the call center people, myself included, needs to answer the phone. We didn't really answer the phone. There were people that were answering phones, but it wasn't me. But I would get, so-and-so has to cancel, or so-and-so registered. One other quick point about just timing in this registration. This is a fire and forget registration. It's not self-serve. You do not get a quote unquote account. You cannot log back in and pick a different time. And that decision was made because of timing. We only had 3 weeks. There's a lot that goes into that. So you fill this in. If you want to, you get an email and a text, an SMS text once you register successfully and you are assigned a time slot. But in that message, it says, if you need to change anything or cancel, you need to reach out to us here. And Centene set up a call center. So this call center would field calls, and they needed a tool, or they would work with me, and they would need essentially what many of us would consider that back-end administration piece. They needed to get in and see the raw data and be able to remove registrations, move registrations, edit anything. We used Microsoft Dynamics for that, and we used a custom model-driven app, which I'll show here as well, that did that piece of it. So we basically got the full backend administration done out of the box for a few licenses for Dynamics and a couple hours worth of customizing Dynamics. So it was very quick to do. And again, you're not brushing over this quickly, like I won't show it. This is, I want to talk about it here, but then dive into it and demo it here in a second. The other piece, on site, when these events physically happen, hundreds of volunteers come together. And these volunteers, for the most part, are different groups of people, nurses, doctors from different organizations. Many of them have never met. They needed to be able to quickly get up to speed. I had an hour to train them. If you're going to work registration from 8 to noon, you need to sit here at this table. Here is an iPad. Here's what you do when people walk in the door. If you are a scribe and you're logging these vaccinations, here's what you do. So the app had to be easy, had to be mobile. It was all on an iPad. It was a Powerapp that we custom built Powerapp. It was a Canvas app. Requirements changed as we went. PowerApps made this a breeze. I couldn't have been prouder of the PowerApp capability. It was so easy. When I say requirements change, we know how that goes. If you've been in software any amount of time, or if you've been in software a week, I'm sure you've been here long enough to find out that no matter what you're building, requirements change. When we built this particular application, we were told that we're going to, we have so many vaccines to give away. It's pre-registration only. The only people that are going to get a vaccine must come here in advance and fill out this information and save it. And then they get a slot. We published this site, the news shared it, newspapers shared it, people filled up. Our slots were all taken. Then people went into a wait list, and there's a lot that went into that. Ultimately, though, the day of the event, there were a lot of no-shows. The first day we had 700 vaccines, and there's a lot that goes into, you have to have them all frozen below a certain temperature, and then you pull them out in cases and lot numbers, and you put them in a refrigerator. Once they're pulled out, they've only got a specific life cycle. You can't keep them in that refrigerator for more than X number of hours. Even then, they have to be used within, within a day or two. There's a lot that goes into that people were trying to manage. So it was a inventory management of a very highly volatile piece of inventory that must be frozen until you use it. So we hit the end of day one, and we literally went down to some neighboring businesses. We had 30 or 40 vaccines that were ready to go. We had to give them away within hours. So we went to a nail salon. We walked into a nail salon. We said, who here has not been vaccinated? A bunch of employees and customers raised their hand, and we said, come with us right now. We're going to go put a needle in your arm and give you a vaccination. And they did it. We We're just walked up the street and gave pulled people back in and gave vaccines out because we had to, or else we threw them away. We didn't want to do that. So by day 2, the requirements changed that they said we need to accept walk-in registrations, meaning when they're on site, if they're, we could just put the call out and we get people from all over town to come. That was not a requirement that we had planned the infrastructure for. So I showed up early, broke out PowerApps and added 3 or 4 new screens to our PowerApp to do walk-in registrations. And I did it all within 20 minutes. It was crazy how fast you can write functionality in here. And that's part of why we're even talking about it here in this particular session. So all the on-site stuff was in PowerApps. All right, let me get into demoing it. Let me look at these questions really fast. So the first question, and I guess you're going to see this right now. How topical. Thank you for asking that. The first question is out-of-the-box DataVerse CRM tables leverage versus creating custom tables. We used contacts. Contacts is the only out-of-box. Everything else was custom tables. So a person with their address and their email and phone number and all of that, the out-of-the-box DataVerse CRM comes with an entity pre-built that comes in every DataVerse database called the contact, and that we did leverage. The other 3 tables that entities we did not use. License per registered user, we'll talk about costs later. We did it per device because we didn't know who the registered users are. We were given 100 random volunteers that they didn't know the names of until they showed up. So security was tricky. So we licensed all of our iPads as iPad 1, iPad 2, iPad 3. We assigned them all per app, PowerApps licenses that day. And then we had it all turned on and ready to go. They were not as concerned from a audit history or any of that. The scribes tracked what nurse gave what shot, so that was being tracked anyway. They didn't care who edited data. None of that went up to the state. And honestly, at the end of the event, this data was all purged anyway, at the end of all these events. So I will point that out as I give demos here. All of the data you're seeing is sanitized. I went out to Makaru and I regenerated people. I deleted most of our data and I regenerated random names. So you're seeing nothing here that is any personal identifiable information for anyone. So this is not the actual live data. It's the actual systems. I'm in a sandbox environment here, United Immunity Sandbox. There's United Immunity. I'll show briefly how these environments work, but if you're new to the Power Platform or Dynamics or any of that, they isolate apps and functionality and DataVerse and lots of things into what's called an environment. You can have many environments. An environment is either production or sandbox. Those are kind of the 2 states. And there's some differences that go into one or the other, obviously, in terms of SLA or pricing or things of that nature. But you can promote, you can export PowerApps of certain kinds out to zip files or to external files and move them around. So kind of getting into the next question down here. The application lifecycle and how we did it. I'll show some of that as we go, but we did have 2 distinct environments, one sandbox that we used to test as we went, then production that we promoted to, and we'll talk more about that. But the URL I'm on right now, make.powerapps.com. This is where we started. So if I was given this demo in order, I'm going to start with data and show you. There's a data tab here on the left in the navigation. This make.powerapps.com is also, there's an apps tab. This is where you see the apps. I've got some apps in here. I've got United Immunity STL registration. It's a Canvas app. This is the iPad app that I talked about earlier. We'll show this today. There's another one that is a model-driven app. This is one that's hosted in Microsoft Dynamics. We'll talk briefly about the differences, but I'll show both of them and I'll show what the editing and design and publishing experience looks like for both. Before we get to those though, tables. This is DataVerse. Think of this like your persistent database. SQL Server, if that's your background or wherever you come from, Oracle or anything, really MySQL. These are the entities. Now, rightly or wrongly, we did not start with an empty DataVerse. Well, I will say there's no such thing as an empty DataVerse, but we started our backend administration with Dynamics for Sales. Sales, I forget the name of it, the exact one, but one of the Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics instances that's built for a sales pipeline. So some of the stuff in here, you see there's a lot more entities out of the box here than would generally be there if I started with just an empty Dynamics. Of all of these, you can kind of see over here, there's a type column. Some of them say custom, some say standard. Contact, for example, is one that we used heavily. If I click on contact, now I'm under tables contact, it shows me all the columns, relationships, it's loading, business rules, views, forms, dashboards, charts. This is DataVerse. It is very easy for me to change this. I can basically, think of this as your SQL Server table designer. I can come in here and customize this, first name, last name, middle name. I see the data types over here. These are not SQL Server data types, or any, but they're data types. They're Boolean, yes or no. There's lookups to other things. There's text. There's date pickers. There's numbers. You can add new columns, remove columns. You can do anything you want to this table. I can click on the data tab out here on the right and see. I don't see any data. Oh. I can see my data. So again, this is mock data. This doesn't really make any sense. I think I left some of the addresses, but the people that the emails, the phone numbers are all 1, 2, 3, 4, stupid stuff. But I can edit any of this data right here. Even better, which I do a lot, one of the other reasons I like DataVerse. Now, do I come here and edit data here frequently? Not necessarily. I keep a Windows machine open, and let me jump back there. From this table, whoops, I can I do it from here? Maybe I can. I can edit data in Excel. Now I'm on a Mac right here, and I usually preface that, but I work on a Mac. 99% of what I do is on a Mac. Every now and then I do need a Windows machine, so I keep a Windows machine available as a VM in Azure that I keep turned off, and I turn it on only as needed, so I don't pay for it. But
I see Microsoft
if I'm on
Word.
Windows,
Do you guys see Excel?
and I have Excel,
I
I can click that
Word
edit in
document.
I don't
Excel,
see Excel,
and I can
Kevin.
change my data right here. So somebody, I'm echoing, somebody has their mute off.
Hey, Kevin, we don't see Excel.
Yeah.
We just see Microsoft
Yeah, we
Word.
see a Word document. It's actually really weird. It's like the screen is in a Word document.
That is not me. Did somebody else take over?
Looks like you're sharing a Word document.
That is not me. I have to request control again. Somebody else shared something. Can somebody grant me rights?
It's like Bob
again?
took over.
Yeah, Bob took over. It says I'm waiting for approval to share again. Bob Jones, are you there? Hello?
Yeah, I'm trying to help you, Kevin. All right, Kevin, try again.
All right, back in. Can you see me now?
Yes.
Yep, we see Excel.
So I'm on a Windows machine now, but this is the same data. I can edit any of this data. This is my DataVerse table tied to a live Excel spreadsheet on a table by table basis. I can change any of this. And it remembers all my changes. And I can just publish down here with this PowerApps DataVerse plugin. Whoop, my session expires, it's gonna make me log in again, which I'm not gonna do necessarily. I don't need to hang here, but if I was signed in, it would just publish this right back into DataVerse and make the change in real time. So I can go from this screen and edit. I could come in here and edit in place, and I can do whatever I want, but you know, there's an edit record where it pops up this nice little, it takes me out to the Dynamics that I have a custom form set up for. We'll come to this next, but I do a lot of my bulk editing in Excel if I needed to. Like, for example, prior to giving this talk, I needed to sanitize a lot of data. It took me less than 10 minutes. I just edited everything in Excel, deleted all the rows I didn't want, you know, pasted in dummy data names and addresses and phone numbers, published, and it just overwrote everything in DataVerse right from that Excel plugin, which is Windows only. That's the only thing I had to do in all of this in Windows. That contact was, it came out of the box. Some of the ones I added, for example, way down here is vaccination event. This is a custom entity. This does not exist in Dynamics, does not exist. I came in here and clicked new. entity, and I typed all of this stuff in. Things like event date, event status, vaccination type, like what are we giving? How allotment? We're giving 1,000 vaccines away. So our system was an inventory management. Once we hit 1,000 vaccines, we couldn't give out anymore. That's all we physically had in a freezer or had out of a freezer. The manufacturer's Pfizer. So this was a custom entity. Now there's some things in here like owner and import sequence number and modified by that come out of the box on all DataVerse entities. I left them here, but like current registration, default NDC. NDC is a kind of a lot number type thing that goes physically on these forms when you report to the state. So this was just me creating something. So I went through, like I said earlier, there's a lot of things here. We use contact, event registration I made up. That's a new custom entity that I made. Vaccine event, this is the definition of our events and kind of the settings, if you will, and then time slots. So time slots are a child object of registration. This is our 9 to 9:15, 9:15 to 9:30 type thing. We have some settings here at the time slot. So very simple entities. That list probably overcomplicates it, but in here, patient capacity per time slot, how many people registered for this time slot, things of that nature. So we did it all here. One thing I do want to point out, some of these things are lookups. If you go in this data column, and I'm not going to go through all the stuff here in DataVerse just because there's a lot to talk about tonight, but choices are your lookups. So this is, and then a lot of this thing, I can come down here and do custom, and it'll filter it. What one would I have? I forget which of these have custom lookups. I might have just did them not as shared choices, but just done them in here. For example, so when you set up these DataVerse entities, you have the ability to set up, find me a quick example here. Hold on. Oh, right here, registration status is an example. So registration status is a drop down, if you will. My options come down to pending, confirmed, vaccination complete, they did not show up, or they're checked in, meaning confirmed, they registered online, I just left it at that. Once they get there, they switch. So there's kind of a workflow and a state that goes with a registration. So DataVerse enforces that these are the only options. And behind the scenes, it does not use these strings as the values. So it gets into, there's an ID behind each of these. If I come in here and I view more, pending is actually 100 million here. And if I come to confirmed, it's probably 100,000,001. So these IDs are unique across this DataVerse instance. So they're sometimes in code, which I'm going to switch to C# here in a second, that I'm not using the string pending. I have to send over this unique ID that it takes me a little bit to get in here and see. And there's a number of ways to get into DataVerse to see that, but that's just one of them here. So I set up 4 entities in DataVerse. Switch gears, I'm going to show you Microsoft Dynamics. I'm going to kind of do this in a little different order than maybe planned, but I can come back here. Let me get rid of all this just so I can go into the beginning of Dynamics. Notice it says Sandbox, United Immunity SDL Sandbox. I have 2 Dynamics environments. This matches my, when I was in DataVerse here, this is the Dynamics environment for this here. But this is my Dynamics instance. You look down the left, I've got home, some recent, I can pin some entities. I've got a section called patients, entity called patients and event registration. There's only 100 in here, I've limited, or 94. Down here, and this is just how Dynamics works, I have 2 main areas. I have event management, which is where my call center people generally work. Then I have administration. My administration only has one thing, vaccination events. Our 4 events happened at the Victor Roberts building up in North County or North City. I set one up tonight called .NET Meetup test event. This is editing my vaccination event entity. What you just saw in DataVerse, I'm editing it here. This is how I would do it. Once I set up that DataVerse, I did not edit data in Excel, or I did not do it in that editor. I set up this nice little, I have everything exactly as I want. I have groups, event settings, all the right drop downs, event status. These are things that I set up in DataVerse. Vaccination type. I even have my child objects, my time slots. I generated these in C#, but they are all child objects. I can add a new time slot that's related to this .NET test meetup, .NET meetup test event right here. So this is the global admin. I'm the only person that edited these events. Other people got in here and worked with patients, and then patients have event registration. So if I edit any one of these patients, I can see the summary information, which is not everything. If you're familiar with Microsoft Dynamics and a contact, this is not everything that you would generally see. This is a highly customized, and I'll show that in a bit when we get into my model-driven Power App, but I used PowerApps. Microsoft Dynamics is built on PowerApps. It's very easy to modify anything in Dynamics, any screen, any grid, any list, anything in Dynamics is editable via the PowerApps infrastructure. So I took advantage of that and said, if other people are going to be using this, I'm going to limit it to only things that we care about. So I went in and I hid most everything you're familiar with in a contact. I kept only stuff that I needed, contact information, their basic demographic. We went so far as to hook up with one Uber, but one of the car ride providers. Anyone who wanted to go to one of our events, transportation was provided at no charge. We sent cars to people's house and they picked them up and drove them there, got them a shot, drove them back home. So one of the questions during registration was, do you need transportation? In as much that we needed to contact them, they went through a different pipeline where someone called them and said, a car will be at your house at 8 o'clock, be ready. The only other, we asked gender, race, and ethnicity. We did have to ask pregnant or breastfeeding as a medical question, only because the people administering the shots needed to know that you provide the shot differently if it's a female who is pregnant or breastfeeding. So that was something that checkbox is Boolean yes or no had to flow all the way back and had to be told to the person providing the shot. Event registrations, this is just, this person doesn't have any, but if they had a registration, we could do that right from here. So all of this is editable. When I said on a previous slide that Dynamics is the engine that's the back-end administration, this is Microsoft Dynamics. It might not be the Dynamics you're used to seeing if you've used one of the out-of-the-box customer service or sales or any of those. We customized it heavily, and I'll show that. We came in here and changed the columns here to only things we cared about. You can export this, you can edit it in Excel, you can do anything right here. So we basically, just by using DataVerse and having the knowledge of quickly being able to customize Dynamics, got the database within an hour and the back-end administration. So I'm guessing within a morning, all of this was in place and we were ready to edit data. Before I go into the model-driven app here in Dynamics, I'm going to switch to C# and show you this piece. I'm not going to go super far down Angular or any of the tech stack here. I know some of you might want to see more than others, but we had a full .NET Azure DevOps CI/CD pipeline that we hooked up in very short order within a morning. Very small Angular site. There's not much to the Angular site. The Angular site, essentially those 3 views that are static. What we did use is .NET Core, the newest at the time, and there's some basic controllers. The primary controller, this is how simple we were able to make this. We used registration controller. It is all dependency injection, pretty standard little .NET setup, but there's Git configuration data. So this is a RESTful endpoint. We don't specify this is an HTTP GET. So you call registrations GET, we get configuration data. Notice there's no inputs. The output here is an object of type config data. What does that look like? It's about what you'd expect if you were to call that. If I were to call it, I guess it was already open. It's right here. This is the GET. This is Postman. I'm running. I assume, maybe not. The breakpoint for some reason let me run again. I'm in Writer. If you're not familiar with this development environment, it's by JetBrains. It's called Writer. That is what my company uses to do all of our C# development. We swear by it. We think it's much better than anything else out there. It is commercial. You do pay for it. But if you're unfamiliar with what this is, I point that out. So that's up and running. Came back. If you call Git API/registration and you do a Git, it gives you back a list of available events, their name, their address. This all comes from DataVerse. Now, I wrote code in C# to query DataVerse and return this and add in some C# business logic, but you get all the available time slots. This tells you an ID, which is a GUID out of DataVerse, and the available time slot. If this time slot was full, it wouldn't have came back. The business logic to filter and kind of the inventory management piece of it is all done in C#. What phone number, support phone, I don't have one in this test event, but this is what the available things are for this particular event. It's a one-day event. We have time slots from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. that we generated. Simple enough there. On the flip side, that's a Git configuration data because ultimately that's all this screen needs to function. So back to this registration screen, when this screen opens, it calls that Git registration data and it uses that data to render this bottom piece, right? This is just a set of cards and a drop down, and you pick one of these and you say go. If this was filled in, it would have went, but we have client-side validation here. Back to writer, submit registration. And when I fill that out, and I can go do that really fast just to do it. I could say Jane Doe, some things are required. I don't need that. I could save it. I gotta pick anything. Typing too fast. Actual phone number, 123 Main Street. Have to say no to these questions. Again, just a random business rule. Pick 945, book vaccination. Registration successful. I got an email and I got a text message. I actually didn't get an email for development, and these just as a little tip. We use Mailtrap religiously. A few seconds ago, Mailtrap picked up an email that says vaccination appointment confirmation, Jane Doe registered, type Pfizer. Do not reply to this email directly. Instead, the fact that this is my email, because I set that particular event where I'm the support email as well. So the fact that it went to me and it also told me to contact me is just because I'm the tester. I can see how this looks mobile. I can see how it looks on a tablet. I can see how it looks on a full screen. I can get spam analysis. The fact that our domain has all the correct things and we're not likely to be blocked. I can look at HTML source. It'll check my HTML for mobile-friendly things. We use Mailtrap. Mailtrap is a great tool. When I say we use Mailtrap, essentially in our development environments, instead of having actual SMTP servers, whether it's SendGrid or Mailgun or something else, we use a Mailtrap account and all mail is sent to it and then goes into mailboxes accordingly. And that's what this is. Every developer would have access to this mailbox. So there's a get config data, submit registration, and then we have one more. This is it. This is the whole thing. Send event reminders. We scheduled a Microsoft Flow to call this, and 5 days, or I forget the exact amount of time before an event, this particular endpoint got called, and we sent out reminder emails and we sent out texts that said, hey, just a reminder, you're supposed to be here at this time. Here's where it is. Here's parking information and all of that. So that was just another thing. This is the primary controller in the actual code, and I'm just showing some of this. DataVerse used to be called Common Data Service. So when I started using it, it wasn't called DataVerse. So when you see CDS in my code, that's because at the time a lot of this was written, it was CDS data, but it is DataVerse. So we have a class here that we're able to query and get access to. We can OAuth against DataVerse. We can get client credentials with a client ID, a client secret that we have in config. And then essentially I've got some utility functions. I can get a list of time slots, for example. Notice this object type says new _ time slots. You'll see that periodically if I come back to my tables collection here. This is back to the browser. Way down here at the bottom, I see time slots. Over here is a column called name. This is the internal name, if you will. New _ time slot. Since I created it, it's new _ event registration. That's what they put as kind of a prefix, new underscore vaccine event. I point that out because when I'm getting a list of something from here, I can filter. This is all OData, so I can provide it an OData formatted filter. It will get me a list of, I created this little CDS time slot class that is C#. It has these column names. Again, I could go back to that website and show you, but these are what the column names are behind the scenes. I've got some Json serialization that serializes the JSON that comes back from the graph endpoint to the C# class. So I'm using Newtonsoft's JSON .NET stuff, infrastructure, NuGet package, and it converts all of my registration, my vaccine event, and my contact with the ethnicity, the date of birth, the race. I've got a C# class for all of these. And then I've got a utility class. That's what the service is that allows me to read and write all of this stuff. So here's Git registrations. I can pass through OData filtering. This is not SQL. I'm sending up OData. If you're new to OData, there's a way to filter this. It's a pretty common protocol right now with a lot of APIs, but I'm making an OData call and filtering the results back, right? So I'm not saying give me 5,000 users, or event registrations. I can say give me this particular, only ones for this event or only ones for this time slot ID. So there's some code here that is basically just appending this stuff on to a filter that I pass out. And I'm calling, new event registrations and filtering that data back. But I get C#. And on the same flip side, I've got update classes. I can take one of these instances of like this event, and I've got an update item function that will actually post this data back. It'll update this particular ID with this data and handle everything. You'll also notice I'm using Redis cache for some of this. And part of that is just I'm a big proponent of caching data. So I don't want to tell you that DataVerse is not fast, but it's still my app service running C# over here making a call to some API to read and write its data. So there's a lot of conversion, HTTP stack stuff, JSON serialization, going back and forth for the same data all the time. That doesn't benefit anyone. So if I'm getting this particular event, this CDS vaccination event might have been created once, and the data in DataVerse doesn't change for 2 months. So I keep it in Redis cache. I have a caching service here. So I create a little unique key given that event ID, and I read it. If I get it back, I return it. If I get null back, I try to read it from DataVerse, and then I add it to the cache. So this pattern is common in most C# code bases that you see that do caching, but it also makes my site blazing fast. If I come back here and I go to registration, this might take a second because it's reading. And then if I do it again, I just jinxed myself by saying that. I don't know what it's doing right now. But basically, when it calls the API, that piece of the infrastructure is instantaneous. See how fast it is the second time? Because all of that Git registration was cached in a Redis cache instance. So it never needed to do it. If somebody else sitting at a computer away from me on the other side of town registered for one of these events while my browser was sitting here open, it would invalidate my cache. So the next time that I refreshed, it would take a minute again because it would have to reload everything from DataVerse and run the business rules. But assuming that I'm refreshing fast enough that nobody is actually hitting it, it's blazing fast. Never hits DataVerse again. So I've just optimized the back end. Now, did I need to do that? Could I have handled the few second wait? Yes, but it allowed me to support load. At the time, we were worried about a lot of people registering within a short window of time, so we needed to support that load. So a lot of caching, a lot of reading and writing and logic that goes into that DataVerse. I'll talk a bit later. We use Twilio for our SMS messaging. That was very easy to hook up, but we've got a wrapper around Twilio service. It's all of 10 lines of code. And then most of this particular implementation comes inside of what we call the registration service. This is long. There's 1,300 lines of code in here, so not terribly long, but it generates the Twilio messages, does some conversions between those weird million lookups and basically enums here that we're getting back so that the JavaScript and Angular front end doesn't need to know what these numbers are. They send back one of the, these options for race and ethnicity are provided by the state and federal government, so we had to match them exactly. We just needed to convert them if we're saving them back to DataVerse so it knows our numbers. We don't need to do that in PowerApps. It does that and has Intellisense. So C# is used, easy to use, easy to hit DataVerse, easy to have all this other stuff. I'm not going in too much. Kind of a quick overview of C#. The C# CI/CD pipeline is pretty standard Azure DevOps stuff. We're deploying this all out to an app service. It actually goes into a Docker container into an app service, and we're hosting it in an app service. It's clustered and it's auto scale. So it would scale up and scale down. Right now we have it really dialed way back because we're not using it other than for this demo. But that's where all of that code is. Back here, if I come into make.powerapps.com and make sure I'm in my sandbox and I want to look at, I'm going to quickly show you this model-driven app, just how I get there. I'm going to say edit. This is, and again, some of this is kind of a quick overview, but I want to show enough that you get a sense of what it's used for and how it works. But you know, I don't have time in this particular type of session to get into the nitty-gritty details, but again, happy to talk about it offline. This is a model-driven app designer for PowerApps. This is what I'm editing right here is this stuff, the navigation, what these grids look like. If I edit one of these, the screen. I'm in Microsoft Dynamics here, but I have complete control over that from this screen here. Sitemap, I can edit my sitemap. Event management, patients. There's no such thing as patients in Microsoft Dynamics. I renamed contacts to patients. So if I click here and look at what patients has, it's really, I'm editing a contact. I just called this thing patient. I could call it anything. I call it patients. I can call it people. Anything I want to call it. Save. Publish. We're publishing your sitemap because that's the only thing I changed. If I come back here, wherever I was, right here, and I refresh, it might take a second for it to get uncached, but this will ultimately rename itself people. People. So I just renamed my navigation. Why would you do that? In line of businesses where people have certain terms for certain things, it sometimes makes sense to call things what the end user would expect, or a lot of times makes sense to do that. But I can edit as far down as the sitemap. I don't use any dashboards in this particular thing. It was just too simple for that. I really only have contact, event registrations, time slots, and vaccinations. Action card got pulled in because contact came in. But these are the entities that I'm editing. Each entity, you can define the forms you use to edit it. Views, these are the grids. If I had any charts or dashboards specific to that, we'll do forms first for my contact. I have a custom form right here. This is the Powerapp model-driven app designer. A lot of new terms I'm probably throwing at you tonight if you're new to this, but hopefully this gives you a sense of what this is. A lot of people know what PowerApps are, and they're used to seeing maybe demos of Canvas apps, but not this type of app. So this particular screen, I'm zoomed way out here. If I zoom in, this is the screen that you saw me using. I can come in here and I have control over these groups and this hierarchy, and I can pick last name and I can hide it, show it. I can rename the label. An email, for example, I'm gonna name this email 2 just to do something with it. Get off there. Again, I could save. I can move things around. I have a complete, all the data in my database. There's a lot of stuff here I'm not using, like birthday. If I wanted birthday here, I could put birthday. Let me zoom out a little bit. I put date of birth and did not use birthday. Not sure why I did that, but there is an out of the box birthday. But let's say I have assistant phone number, and I wanted it to go way over here. I could just drag it out and drop it. Now my assistant phone number shows down there. And again, I could save and publish, and it immediately becomes available in my, now, if you're talking back to your application lifecycle, your whole ALM, I'm only in my sandbox. This is not going to production. I'm publishing this to a sandbox. If I want to propagate all my changes from the sandbox to production, that's a different workflow in Dynamics, right? I'm doing more exporting applications and moving them. I'm not doing that right here. I'm getting it to where other people that are playing in the sandbox can see it. But now if I come here and I read, pregnant breastfeeding does not have that down here. Again, it'll take just a second. It just published. But I'll eventually see that. Looks like it's a little bigger. Assistant phone number showed up down there. Why was that in that list over there? Because it was already part of that entity in DataVerse. So this here's all the columns that are available in DataVerse. So I use DataVerse to set up my entities or modify my entities. Then I could come here and drag them, and I can do some of that editing here. You can also get into, I can change my layouts, do different 2-column tabs, 3-column tabs, all different inputs. I can drop a Canvas app in here. You get crazy. I can modify any screen. So back to my slides earlier, when we decided we could do this pretty quickly in 3 weeks, it was all of a morning before, I had my entities laid out and I had a complete backend administration done. Didn't write a line of code to do it. It was all done in DataVerse, and me dragging and dropping and hiding and moving things around in this little designer and saving it. That is the model-driven app. Why is this called a model-driven app? Because you don't have, in this particular way of using PowerApps, when you do a model-driven app, a lot of assumptions are made and a lot of simplification of certain things that are done in such a way that I can't drag and drop these to the extent that I get, pixel perfect. I'm choosing some containers, choosing some, basic, I can't code in here. I can do some JavaScript. I've done a little bit of it. It's not anything that I would really recommend. Essentially, this is quick CRUD screens. But a lot more than CRUD. You can design, like I put this event registration tab and just drug my child entity over here and got, a parent-child relationship and all of that going. So it's extremely powerful. But if you need hardcore business logic and other stuff, you got to really decide where that goes and where you're doing things like that. So model-driven app has its place in this whole ecosystem. I love them, use them quite a bit, and get pretty far with helping customers solve business problems by just creating a model-driven app and giving them the CRUD they need. Whereas what I'm going to show you next is the Canvas app, which is a little more akin to what you might expect from a development experience, depending on what your background is. So the next piece, come back, where am I? Right here, so I'm done for now. I'm going to go to this other app. This is United Immunity SDL registration. This is the on-site. I told you it's if I just click on it, it's going to run it. This is what it looks like. This opens on my phone, on my tablets. Whoops. Edit it. Eventually. I think one of these other tabs is already editing it up here. So it asked me if I wanted to take over that editing. This is what that app looks like. So when I talked about earlier that there's the people that register, the administrative call center use that Dynamics, that model-driven app. People on site had one of these 20 iPads. They were all over this building. Lots of people were coming through. We did 1,500 in 2 days, and there were 100 people at any given point volunteering on site. So when you walked in, and again, this was all sanitized data. I use a site called Mockaroo. I don't know who knows what Mockaroo is. Mockaroo is a third-party tool that allows you to generate random data. You basically tell it what data you want. ID, first name, last name. You can add any kinds of data, IP addresses, Booleans, buzzwords. I replaced all of my data with Mockaroo data, so that's what you're seeing. One of these, there it is. But in general, this experience was built for touch. So it's big fonts. It was on an iPad. I'm using it here in a browser. This is my navigation across the bottom. This is just the way I built it. They pick what event they're at. So Jane Doe registered earlier. We did that through the registration. Jane Doe registered for the .NET Meetup. They picked the 9:45 time slot. They are from Wildwood, Maine, because I just left that Maine. I can come in here and say Jane. She says my name is actually spelled, I don't know, Jane Fu. If it was incorrect when they got to the front desk, they could update that. Boom. It updates back in the database. Somebody back over here could find Jane Fu is now in the database. It updated in Dynamics. It updated in DataVerse. If they ask them if they're pregnant or breastfeeding, they check in. This switches color and says checked in, and it goes gray. A medical professional takes Jane. They ask her some questions in person. They ensure she's filled out a waiver. They walk her back to a table where she's going to get a vaccine. The people at the table are using this screen. These are two different screens. They look similar because it was a training exercise for me. I had to teach 100 people how to do this. So the people that are sitting at these desks had dose tracking tab. Only people show up there are the people that are checked in. So they had to have passed registration. So they're working down a queue essentially. They pick what lot number. This information comes off a vial that the vaccine or the needle the vaccine has, NDC number, the name of the person who vaccinated them, left or right arm. When they did it, log the dose. Boom. They are now vaccinated. Vaccination complete. If they screwed it up or they forgot something, we made the decision just to let them type it in, right? So data entry, very topical. If somebody comes back here and they want to search, let me find an event that has more people. Very easy to search. If I want to search for Jervis, I can type Jervis in. Boom, it's all touch sensitive. If I wanted to refresh. I could do anything. There's Show Me Vax data for people that type this stuff in to Show Me Vax. There were some we ended up sending them a spreadsheet, but there was some on-site typing in. We then had walk-ins. If you walked in, I had my, not fancy looking screen over here where you just basically filled out all the information that was on that registration form. You didn't really need to give them a time slot, but if you wanted to, you could, or leave it unassigned, and you could register a walk-in. Or it would say error registering walk-in because I didn't put any data in there. So this data it's available on your phone, on Android tablets, iOS. It's a native app that we're able to build. And if I change something, it's very easy to publish and refresh, and it just goes, I can change anything. Keep saying that I'm editing it somewhere else, maybe over here. Let me show you this. This design experience is much different than the other. This is still a Powerapp, but it's just a different type of Powerapp. This is called a Canvas app. I actually do have a list of widgets and controls over here that I can drag and drop, and I can move things around if I want. So I've got a design experience that's a little more low level. I can modify properties to a different extent. I can do any of the standard stuff. Icons, galleries tend to be your grids or your lists. Text inputs, all the way full edit forms, date pickers, buttons. Lots of the standard input things you'd expect if you were a web or a Windows developer. Ratings, sliders, radio buttons, checkboxes. You can get into layout controls, different galleries, different containers, data tables. Everything here is in a container, header, footer, left body, right body. It all sizes accordingly in that container. So I've done my best to make it responsive and work a little better on different devices. You can put media in here, images. You can use the mobile cameras, the device cameras, barcode scanners, video. You can embed Microsoft Stream feeds, import and export capability, PDF viewers. You want a full map, or there's even a AR, 3D viewer control you can drop in. Lots of different shapes if you want to get into the drawing. I'm just running through these very quickly. Charts, if you wanted to use dashboard, even better, if it was powerful, you could drop a Power BI tile in here. So you can go out to Power BI, do some crazy data visualization, and then come back here and embed this. On the flip side, if you're in Power BI, weirdly enough, and you're creating a dashboard or a report, you can embed a Powerapp. You can embed one of these Canvas apps. So if you have the need to manipulate data over there, you can do that as well. Then you can get into mixed reality and AI builder. You can do business card readers and form processing. Some of these have a little diamond out here. These are premium. It affects some of the licensing on how you do these. You pay a little bit more, but lots of things you do, mixed reality. So you can drag and drop. This, you're coding to some degree. Is it C#? No, it is not C#. And I say C# as my baseline because I'm talking at a .NET Meetup. But what language you use here, this experience is meant to give you all kinds of crazy power, but the term is low code. I want this right here, the property of text, the display text. These are all the different properties, and these will equate to what you see over here in the properties window, but I got to drop down up here just like Visual Studio does, or used to. I'm using this item because this is a gallery, which is a grid, so each row is this item. Dot patient, which is a sub-property of what I'm using, and I'm using the full name. I get full Intellisense up here, so I can do anything here. If I hit period, I can say full again. It's going to pull it up. Full name. Oh, found I have a property called full name. Great. Notice it changes this in real time. If I wanted to put another label somewhere, or I wanted to edit, I'll put it way down here at the bottom because I dropped it into a container, which it's at first, but this way down here, you see the word text. Anything changes. I guess a couple quick things that I get used to that I glance over. If you're new to PowerApps, there's no development environment for PowerApps. It's browser-based, meaning that you do all of this in a browser. So I just have a tab open here in Chrome on my MacBook that I'm doing this. So, but that said, don't think it's just like Visual Studio Code is written in Electron. It's still all JavaScript, and it's Electron, so it has access to native things, but the technologies it's using to render what it does is still web-based technologies. It's HTML behind the scenes. That's what you're seeing here as well. So I can drag and drop and move, and there's a tree over here of all my screens. A couple other little weird intricacies of this that I've grown to love, but I do talk about because it was weird to me when I started. I said low code. I don't want that to scare you. You're using a language called PowerFX, but I have places where I can click buttons, and like if you look up here, what does this remind you of? It should remind you of the Excel expression field at the top of Excel. You click into a cell and you can put whatever contents of that cell up at the top. And in there, you can actually use a pretty powerful language in Excel if you wanted to. The expression editor in Excel has all kinds of functions and capabilities, and you can sum and aggregate, and its purpose in life is to, manipulate numbers, right? Do big data, or whatever you're referencing other cells. So I can have a cell in Excel that is a sum of other cells, maybe even on another sheet. That's how this works. This is my tree over here on the left. These are my screens: registration screen, dose tracking screen, show me vax input. Each screen is a tree. All these controls and containers fit in here. Everything has a name. I have not been super good on renaming things. Some are just called separator 4. Some have names like search container, search label, search text, refresh registration. So some of these things have names, but think of this like Excel. Everything here, all these 6 screens are in memory at any given point. And from any one of them, I can reference any of the other controls by name, which is a weird thing to say, but it works. Took me a while to get used to that. For example, sorry, minimize this quick. If I come here, actually, let me look down here. This is my grid. It says search, so I'm searching database, but I'm filtering my event registrations data. I'm going to talk about connections in a minute. My filter is going to be for each event. I want the new name equal to dose event list selected. I'm looking at the top. That's the drop down on the top right. And then I do a string filter, dose search text. This is the name of this text box up here. There's a lot to that I skipped over, but this text box that I've highlighted is called dose search text. Down here, whatever's in this grid is filtering itself toward dose search text.text. It's matching on new name. So if I were to run this screen, and I typed anybody in here, I typed Ovel, it automatically, I didn't need to do anything. That expression at the top just reevaluated in real time. As I type, if I got rid of this and just typed A, I don't do anything. Most of the magic that we're used to writing as C# developers is handled by this low code thing. You really define controls, properties, and the expressions. Where's another example that I can show you? If I go to registration screen here, and I click on this name, this Rodina Brandone, if I go to the color of this text, One of them, I think, is the color. Isn't that it? Come over here, get rid of this. Advanced. Color. This long thing right here, it was color, it just didn't show up for some reason, not sure why. This long expression right here says if this item registration status equals confirmed, I want it to be white. If this item registration equals complete, I want it to be green, or it's going to be gray. So I took the color property of a row of this grid, of the title in this case, and instead of just giving it a color, there's a color picker I could have used and said this is purple. If I wanted this to be some other color, right? Let me get out of this. I could come here and come down to just my regular property thing, and there's colors down here I can tweak. Right, I could take this and make it blue, right? It's going to backfill blue, that's the fill. And this I could make black. I could do some goofy thing and make it in here, or I could go to the advanced tab, and instead of doing that, come down to color or disabled or any of these, I can put an expression in here. Anything in a PowerApp, a Canvas app, can be an expression. That expression is the language that you're using is called PowerFX. It's extremely well documented, and I don't say this lightly because I've been one to poke fun at Microsoft over the years for their documentation in terms of Azure and C#, and I've been doing this a long time. It wasn't always as good as it is today. They've came a long way and put a lot of investments there. So if you're from C# and you're looking at helping someone or building a new app in this Canvas, it's easy to learn. There's Intellisense. If I screw something up, if I type, I don't know, 2 E's right here, whoops, let me go back to that. Notice it shows me red down here that, hey, there's some property here that doesn't work for us. It will underline it. It'll give me name isn't valid. So a lot of what you might be familiar with from your traditional IDs where you've got topical context-based help, you do get that here. You do get Intellisense. All of these, I can tell the addresses. I could hear when we were looking at these colors, the fact that event.new name is there. I can hit period right here. Down here is a scroll bar and all the options. Right? I just happen to be using one called new name. There's a checker. Notice this little stethoscope up here, app checker. Click that, it checks, it tells me somewhere I got a bug. Way over here on this other screen, there's a bug that it doesn't recognize this data card.default. Bugs don't necessarily keep you from running here, but it is good. It also gives me a significant amount of information on accessibility, on performance, on recommendations that it finds. So it'll say, hey, there's an unused variable I don't need here. Inefficient text input here. It doesn't like this text input as to how it's set up, and it'll give me more help if I want as to why. So it's a pretty powerful thing. You've got app level events, confirm exit. I can put a function that runs to make sure that somebody, if I want to save data or do something like that. All of my saves, if I switch to one, find somewhere that saves something. I go to the walk-in screen, register walk-in. It's got functions. This is a pretty complex function, but it works. If my form is valid and I have a certain amount of data, I did some data validation here for key data points. I then do a patch. This patch function actually is the one that patches my DataVerse. It takes only certain columns and updates them. So I don't need to send everything up. I just update the things that are on this screen. It has things like notify, that little bar that popped up at the top. It'll pop up a success message or an error message. This isn't all it does. The language is vast. It'll convert all your data type manipulations, but it's not a functional language in the fact that you write subroutines or functions. You're writing these expressions that get evaluated when something shows or moves around. Its job is to keep all these expressions in sync. If I move something here and there's a dependency, another expression has a dependency on this date of birth, where it might change this color if date of birth is, in the future, easy to do. But you can design very powerful apps. You can add any of these controls, work with them. Once I got down to it, I mentioned one of the anecdotal stories from this particular event that I'm showing these for. I was able to show up in the morning and write this whole screen. This screen took me about 20 minutes. I dropped on a form, picked the columns I wanted, set this over there, did this, tested it a few times, saved it, went to their machines, slid from the top down, just did a refresh, much like you would an iOS app. It buzzed a second, pulled a new, I saved and published, sorry, there's a step in the middle there. But I just went around all the iPads and had them refresh, and it pulled down a new version, and it was on all their devices within seconds. So there is full DevOps. It's not the same DevOps as Azure DevOps. I mean, you can version code, you can do things. I mean, it's still got some differences in how you do other stuff, but you're also able to just, like I'm in a sandbox environment here, I can edit code and publish and get them in the hands of testers in a matter of seconds. Whereas a traditional coding, if I was just using the hammer that is C# and full DevOps, there's still, if you've got the infrastructure in place already, that's possible, but it takes a bit to get that infrastructure hooked up. PowerApps, it kind of comes out of the box. You have a couple other, just as I show things, when you're in PowerApps, I kind of set this theme. There are themes, much like PowerPoint. I'm using this dark blue theme, but I could pick a different theme if I wanted this brown theme, and it'll style everything. Now I've got some hard-coded colors around here, so it's going to look funny in some degree because I chose some of my expressions to use certain colors. When you do a new screen, much like PowerPoint, you can do screens that have themes. You can do landscape, portrait. You can have different layouts if you want to split screens. I use this header, main section, footer quite a bit, but it's got some pre-built ones if you want to learn. See some other stuff that are kind of nice. Switching between screens is really no more than a single function called navigate. Go to the screen, dashboard 2, and do a fade. They've got some navigation. If I have it be here, I could do I think I did all fades, but I could do uncover right if I wanted to do that. Weirdly enough, you don't even have to run. If I just hold my Alt key down, I'm now in run mode. So if I click this, see that swipe, then it does a fade. So you run right inside your designer. I can click run, it'll go full screen, but if I hold my Alt key, I am now interacting, just instead of selecting something to change this property, I'm interacting with it to make a change. Sorry, make sure I did it. So notice now my hovers, and everything here is in memory at all time. So much like an Excel spreadsheet. If you've got 5 sheets in your Excel document, sheet 1 can reference cells in sheet 4 if you wanted, right? Because they're all in memory, it's stateful. There's no, clear this from memory, switch to that one. That's how PowerApps works. Everything's in memory at once. There's also no dialog boxes per se. You have to simulate that with overlays or hiding something and showing something, which is pretty easy to do. It does have global variables. If you want to use them, I have a few of them. I showed one called foobar in a previous demo, but you can set that up. The biggest thing I've skipped over thus far that most people start showing Canvas apps with is data. How does this app know how to get to my data? It has data. Under here are event registrations, contacts, time slots, and vaccine events. So anywhere in my code, by adding that these are my connections, if you will, my connection strings. These are connectors in the PowerApps world. I can connect to anything PowerApps supports. What is that? See all connectors. Oops. This list here, it could be SQL Server tables. It could be SharePoint lists. It could be Office 365 tenants if you wanted to list your users. These are all, some of these are third party, but you could do Adobe Creative Cloud or Adobe PDF Service. There's connectors for that. You can import, you just have an Excel spreadsheet sitting out in the cloud, and you can connect to that and edit that in real time. This goes on forever. DocuSign, there's connectors for that. For Dynamics, you can hit, DataVerse is Dynamics, but you can hit anything. I added data. I picked these particular things out of Microsoft DataVerse. So if I wanted something else out of that DataVerse, I'm already connected to it, so I can see all tables. It'll list all the other tables in that particular DataVerse that's there. If I wanted to hit them, the contracts, anything else, but I went through a wizard and authenticated. So I did OAuth already, where I logged in and it authenticated me to that DataVerse, and then it saved my credentials here with this PowerApp. So you can determine how things are connected. I can remove this, I can re-add it. When you deploy this PowerApp to another environment, you can overwrite and change that connection, right? So it's just like if you're redeploying a C#.NET assembly or a package up to an app service in a stage environment, you might have connection strings in your app settings or your environment variables that go to test databases or staging databases. You would do the same here, and then when you went to prod, you would have to overwrite those connection strings somehow, presumably environment variables or something similar, to go to production. So that process isn't fundamentally different. All your data is set up as these, and mine are called these things. So if I look at that property of this button, I say refresh. That's a thing that just says refresh all the data in event registrations. The reason there's a space is because there's a space here. If I did contacts, where would contacts be? I think over here. I don't need the the single ticks. Contacts, when this word contacts is used, it's the parameter for the refresh function has to be one of my connections. In this case, I'm using contacts. So if someone's on this screen, they click this, I call refresh contacts, it refreshes this whole grid. It knows when to do that. If somebody edits anything that's in a contact, it will refresh anything that's bound to contacts. All of that syncing is done for you. So those are my data sources. You can also do collections, which you can have internal collections. I don't use any of them. All of mine are external data connectors, but internal collections you can create. Say you had the need to do just a, I don't know, a task list, but it was only right here. You can actually have a collection, set up a task list. You can do that in code. You'd have to persist it elsewhere, though. You'd have to write it out to a data connector somewhere. All right. Flip through here, did DataVerse, did that, did Dynamics in the Power Platform. I know I'm going through a lot very fast. I haven't looked at the questions in a minute, but I will get back to them here in a second if any are there. Quickly, communication, I mean, this particular app, just people ask about it. That's why I talk about it. I've demoed it a number of times. We use Twilio. If you're unfamiliar with Twilio, they're a great communication platform for whether it's voice or SMS, text. We used them for SMS. It took all of 20 minutes to hook up. We sent text to everybody. And this is kind of what they look like. I just did one today and I sent an example of it to me. I took it off my phone and shared a screenshot here, but our texts were very descriptive. Email, we use SendGrid, just spun up in our Azure tenant. We have a separate Azure subscription and tenant for United Immunity that we manage. We have a SendGrid account we got through the Azure App Store in there and use that. And it does all of our emails. We have an email service. We use Fluent Mail and just pipe everything through SendGrid. In production, as I said earlier, in test, we use Mailtrap. Makes it easy to test. We can use dummy emails. Mailtrap also keeps any test emails from going in out. Nothing goes out. It all goes to Mailtrap and is caught. So that's another reason we really love Mailtrap across all of our customers. Costs. I'm trying to get through the questions, so I'm going to hit some of these final ones pretty quickly here. Just the choice of these technologies and everything I talked about tonight that I went through very quickly, a lot of it was driven by timing. We were able to get this thing out the door in a week and a half and be in testing. And then within 3 weeks, we were in full production and people were trained on it. So our speed from point A to point B was very quick. We ended up with 3 Dynamics 365 licenses. We paid, I believe, about $60 a month. Don't quote me on that, but the only people that got those licenses assigned to them were myself and other call center people that were actually in managing that. We left those licenses on for the 3 months we ran this thing, and then we turned them off. PowerApps licenses, again, just due to kind of the unusual situation this particular event posed, we didn't know the names or email addresses of any volunteers. So we had no idea who our users would be, and they could not guarantee we would ever know who they were going to be. They were tracking the volunteer stuff separately. So we took 20 devices from Centene, iPads, and we created 20 E1, it was E1, just whatever the lowest cost Office 365 accounts are. We called them iPad 1, iPad 2, iPad 3. If you look in Dynamics here, if I go back to my people, do I have it on any of these screens? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. For example, this one up here, this one was created by iPad user 1. This username right here is the first iPad. We just randomly took 20 iPads, assigned each one a unique account, and then people went. Now that is a kind of getting around some of the licensing issues with PowerApps. I won't get into all licensing with PowerApps, but generally PowerApps are licensed on a per user per month basis. We cheated on the device. That really would not work in 99 out of 100 scenarios. It only worked in our unique instance. If you were going to use PowerApps in your organization, Canvas apps like the last one I showed, I think they're extremely powerful, but licensing is something to consider. If you have 1 or 2 apps, you can pay $10 a month per user per app, so it'd be 20 if you had 2. If you have 4 or more apps, it's $40 a month, and you get unlimited apps. But that's $40 per user per month, and that is MSRP pricing. If you have a partnership with Microsoft, like an EA agreement, or you work with a cloud solution provider like ArchitectNow, or one of the thousands and thousands of other firms that are also in that role, they may offer better pricing than that. But that's what's listed on Microsoft's site. The Azure hosting for this particular thing, I think, was less than $100 a month. We had an app service with a few instances. It was running Linux. It was running that API. We had a Redis cache, a smaller Redis cache we used for some of that data. And then we used App Insights. We also used Azure CDN for and blob storage. I didn't list them here, but the Angular site comes from there. So the CDN and blob storage is probably less than $1 a month added to that, maybe $2 a month but the Angular site, since it's generally static and it's just reading all the live data comes from it calling this API, we don't pay much for that. Mailtrap, we have a commercial account. We pay $25 a month. Not required. Just more just to people are curious what that costs. You need to send emails. Like in our case, we had to have something, so we just got the $99 a month SendGrid tier and turned it off when we were done. And then I don't think total. If you've ever used Twilio, they're consumption based too. You pay per the size and per the amount of messages you send. If you're sending SMS messages like we were here in this example, and we didn't send enough of them to make a dent. I think after 10,000 of these messages, we probably spent $100 total with Twilio. All right. Quickly, and then I'll make sure I run through your questions and that are already listed. If you got more, please put them in the chat, and I'll try to address as best I can with the time we have left. I just took some random pictures as we're getting rolling one day to show that this was an actual event. See the people here. One of the lady in the foreground was giving the shots, or actually they had changed places, but not everyone was capable or certified to provide a vaccine. You have to have a certain level. You have to be a nurse or an RN at a certain level, or doctor. We did get a lot of volunteers that were med students out of WashU. The WashU medical program sent all their students. Some of them were far enough along in their education that they were certified, so they could actually sit and provide vaccines. Others were not, so they were the ones that sat here with this iPad you see, and that's the exact app I showed you. They were just taking, they were recording the vaccines as they were being given. They were sitting there, they had to write out the cards you're probably familiar with if you've been vaccinated. Then they filled in this information as they went. So they kept it open. We got it down to where we could do it in 30 seconds. Somebody give a shot, type in the data, next. We got to where we could go super, super fast. Some of that was just features in the app that I was able to make on site, like all the NDC numbers and lot numbers were the same for a case. So you could spend 4 or 5 hours, never needed to change that data. So I put a single button that said copy last values over here. They loved that. So they could sit here. If this data was the same and somebody else sat down, you logged dose for whoever this is for Angelique Ovell. You could, trying to get on here, you could say copy last values and it would just pull in the same data for everything, assuming that M more LPN is still the one giving the shot, left arm. The only thing that changes is you have to, depending on when it is, if it's 5 minutes later, you have to click the now button again, but the lot expiration, lot number, and NDC was the same for hundreds, if not thousands, of doses we give out a day. So we could go all day one day and we never change these numbers. So they literally just copy values every time. Find the new person, confirm they are who they say they are, click copy values, done. Log dose, next person. So the data entry was made to be optimized. So rather than writing a lot of code, I just spent time watching the people that were, it was an exercise in sitting on site, seeing how your software is being used and what problem you're trying to solve and how you can make people's life better. And PowerApps let me do that. The picture on the left, kind of random again. I took this at 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning one day. At 7:30, a half hour prior to this picture being taken, the screen and the functionality that they're using right now with actual end users did not exist. I wrote that app, or wrote that screen. This is the walk-in registration. These people walked in, they heard about this on the news and they came there and they got their vaccine, but they hadn't previously been registered via that website that I started with tonight. So since this started to be the case, I showed up at 7:30, wrote a new screen, that walk-in screen, published it. We went and found an extra table and some chairs and got some volunteers. I gave them 3 iPads And they were taking walk-ins a half hour after the idea for that screen even popped into my head, which is in my career probably the fastest any feature in any app has ever went from my head to actually having end users in a whole workflow that goes. It was crazy. And I mean, that's not because I'm super smart. The tool made that type of screen extremely easy to do. And anybody could have really did it. Given a morning, I could have probably taught any of these people in this picture how to do something similar. It's that easy to do in some regard. Takeaways, and then I'll get to questions. I started this whole talk today saying, hey, please be open to other ideas, technologies, things that you might not have considered. My background is I'm a C# coder. I've been a developer for going on 30 years now, not to date myself. And there's probably people on this call that are more, some people that are maybe 30 days, I don't know. But problem I see many people run into, and that's not just, even within ArchitectNow or the companies that I've worked for, that you get good at a suite of skills and technologies, and that's what you think should be used on every problem. As I've gotten more miles behind me in my development career, I've started to be really open to the fact that I'm there to solve problems, not to use technology for technology's sake. So I try to find ways to leverage existing systems more so now than I ever did. I don't code everything from scratch. I'm open to new ideas. Are they always the best fit? No, but I consider them. And I see what I can do with them. So I've always got my business hat on over my developer hat when I look at things like this. Does it make sense for this customer? What is the implications of licensing or support? There's a lot that goes into it to make those decisions. But we integrate a lot more today. We use a lot more PowerApps. We're sitting down with customers in Microsoft, quite a bit. Last week we spent in the last week, maybe 4 full days with Microsoft and PowerApps and customers and talking about these things. It's a lot more than it's ever been. We see people, whole divisions, the whole companies that are adopting these technologies like crazy. So we're trying not to reinvent the wheel, and we're trying to solve problems and not just write code. And that's a fight. It was a fight for me to switch my brain to say, part of me, when these group of organizations said, write this COVID registration app, I could have just said, man, C#, SQL, MVC or Angular, that's what I know, that's what I'm going to do. We'll spend a night and weekend and we'll knock this thing out. We went a different route. I think got them a better solution quicker. We were able to be nimble and we were able to be quick. That said, let me switch back over. I've not looked at the chat window here in a minute. Let me make sure. Looks like there's stuff in here.
I've been trying to field the tech
Sheila's
questions for you, Kevin,
device-based license,
so that you didn't have to take off. Yeah, I've been fielding some of the tech ones, so you
okay, perfect.
don't have to bug with those. Yeah.
Anything anybody wants to pop off or any last minute questions? I do, if you're still on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute here. Well, I will share just one more thing. Thank you. And I have 2 programming questions I'm going to pop up if you're still on and want to give us a go at it. I am giving away 2 Amazon gift cards, $100 a piece. As I mentioned at the top, we have recorded this talk. If you're interested in rewatching it or sharing it with someone else, feel free to do so. John will share it through the Meetup, and he's got a link to it up here on their YouTube channel. I will make sure that you get this PowerPoint for whatever it's worth. There's not a ton in here, but at worst, it has our contact information if you want to take it down. More than happy to answer any questions, or if you're considering PowerApps, Dynamics.net, if you want an external opinion on something, is this a good route we should go, or is that, or should we look at this route? We have those discussions all the time, and even if it's just a sounding board, I'm happy to, hop on a call or just respond to an email and say, hey, I consider this. If I have a link to something or something I can share that's a tidbit of advice, I'm happy to do that. With that, let me.
Hey, Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but this was a great talk.
I am going to share